The message arrived on a Tuesday morning and it changed everything for humanity. Every radio frequency that humans had ever used suddenly carried the same transmission. Every television screen showed the same image. Every computer monitor displayed the same text. The Galactic Council had finally decided to make contact with Earth. And their message was not what anyone had hoped. For Admiral Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee in the Pentagon when the transmission began. He watched as a tall crystalline being appeared on the screen before him. The creature shimmered with internal light that pulsed in colors humans had no names for. The translators built into the communication system worked quickly to convert the alien speech into English. The message was simple and direct. Earth had been observed for 200 years. Humanity's rapid growth in technology had been noted. Their aggressive expansion into their own solar system had been recorded. Their military capabilities had been studied. The Council represented 47 different species across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. They had laws and they had order. Humanity was deemed too dangerous to exist independently. The verdict was final. Earth must surrender all military capabilities. Earth must accept Council oversight. Earth must submit to galactic law. Compliance was expected within 30 Earth days. Morrison set down his coffee cup and replayed the message. Then he replayed it again. By the 4th viewing, he was smiling and he could not explain why. Perhaps it was the absurdity of it all. Perhaps it was the certainty in the alien's voice that suggested they had never been told no before. Perhaps it was because Morrison had spent his entire career preparing for exactly this scenario. Within an hour, the Pentagon briefing room was filled with the most important people in Earth's military command. Director Helen Carter from the CIA sat across from Morrison. General Patricia Cole, who commanded Space Command, stood near the wall studying the alien transmission on a tablet. President Richard Hayes entered last and everyone stood until he waved them back to their seats. The president looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He had been in office for 3 years and had spent most of that time building Earth's defenses. Not because he knew aliens existed, but because he believed humanity needed to be ready for anything. Now that preparation would be tested, Morrison briefed everyone on what they knew. The deep space sensors had confirmed at least 200 vessels holding position just beyond Neptune's orbit. The ships were large and their energy signatures suggested advanced technology. They had not made any hostile moves yet, but their mere presence was a threat. The Council clearly expected humanity to simply agree to their terms. President Hayes listened to everything without interrupting. When Morrison finished, the president leaned back in his chair and looked around the room. He asked the question everyone was thinking. What were their options? Morrison could not help but smile again. He told the president, with all due respect, that the aliens had made a critical miscalculation. They had been watching humanity for 2 centuries, but they clearly had not been paying attention. They thought humans were like them. They thought humans would negotiate and compromise. They thought humans would fight a limited war and then surrender when they realized they were outmatched. General Cole nodded and added her thoughts. The aliens did not understand what they were dealing with. Every war game that Earth's military had run for 50 years had been preparing for this exact scenario. Every simulation had asked the same question. What if humanity met a hostile alien species that demanded submission? The answer had always been the same. Fight. Director Carter pulled up intelligence reports on the screens around the room. For decades, humanity had been watching the skies with increasingly sophisticated equipment. They had detected anomalies that suggested faster than light travel. They had picked up energy signatures that did not match any known natural phenomenon. They had prepared for first contact, and they had prepared for it to go badly. The truth was that humanity had never stopped being afraid of the dark. Ancient humans had feared predators in the night. Modern humans feared threats from the stars. That fear had driven innovation. It had pushed humanity to develop weapons that could defend not just a country or a continent, but an entire planet. It had motivated the construction of defense platforms throughout the solar system. It had justified the massive investment in space infrastructure that other nations had once called wasteful. President Hayes asked if they could win. Morrison told him honestly that it depended on how the Council defined winning. If the Council wanted to occupy Earth, then they would pay a price that would shock them. If they wanted to destroy Earth from orbit, then humanity would make sure they paid for every inch of ground. If they wanted a quick and easy victory, then they were going to be very disappointed. The president drummed his fingers on the table. He asked what Morrison would recommend. Morrison said they should refuse. They should reject the ultimatum completely. They should show the Galactic Council that humanity did not respond well to threats. He suggested they laugh in the alien faces, and then prepare to show them why humans had not climbed to the top of Earth's food chain by being reasonable. There was silence in the room. Then General Cole started laughing. It was a short bark of laughter that seemed inappropriate for the situation, but it broke the tension. She said that Morrison was absolutely right. Humanity had survived ice ages and plagues. They had endured world wars where they fought each other with terrible weapons. They had overcome their own worst impulses time and time again. They had split the atom and walked on their own moon. They had built stations in orbit and settlements on Mars. They had done all of this while fighting among themselves. Now they had a common enemy. Now humanity could unite behind a single purpose. The thought was almost exciting. For the first time in history, every nation on Earth would fight for the same goal. There would be no divided loyalties, no competing interests, just survival. Director Carter pointed out the risks. The aliens clearly had superior technology in some areas. Their ships could travel faster than light. They had energy shields that Earth scientists were still trying to understand. They had weapons that could probably level cities from orbit. The casualties could be enormous. President Hayes listened to all the arguments. He thought about the 8 billion people on Earth who were going about their lives unaware that their future was being decided in this room. He thought about the children playing in parks and the families sitting down to dinner. He thought about everything humanity had built and everything they still hoped to achieve. Then he made his decision. They would refuse. They would reject the Council's ultimatum. They would prepare for war, and they would show these aliens that humanity had not come this far, just to surrender at the first sign of a bigger threat. The president stood and everyone else stood with him. They had 30 days to prepare, 30 days to unite the planet, 30 days to ready their defenses. The meeting ended and people rushed to their duties. Morrison stayed behind for a moment, looking at the image of the crystalline alien frozen on the screen. He wondered if the Council had any idea what they had just started. He wondered if they understood that they had just threatened a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. He wondered if they knew that humans did not have a word for surrender in most of their languages until they needed one for other people. Morrison finished his cold coffee and headed to Space Command. There was work to do, and not much time to do it. Somewhere beyond Neptune, 200 alien warships waited for Earth's response. They were about to get one they would never forget. 3 days after receiving the ultimatum, humanity was ready to respond. The response would not be delivered through diplomatic channels or through carefully worded treaties. It would be broadcast live across every frequency that could reach the alien fleet. President Hayes wanted the entire galaxy to hear what Earth had to say. Commander Lisa Bennett stood in front of the cameras wearing her dress uniform. She had been chosen carefully for this moment. Her record was impeccable. She had served in the Navy for 20 years and had commanded 3 different vessels. She had a calm demeanor that made people trust her. She also had ice in her veins when the situation required it. Behind her, the flags of every nation on Earth hung in perfect rows. This was not just America speaking. This was humanity speaking with one voice. The broadcast began, and Lisa looked directly into the camera. She addressed the Galactic Council by name. She acknowledged that Earth had received their ultimatum. She explained that the representatives of 8 billion humans had met and discussed the matter. They had debated from every angle. They had considered every option. They had reached a unanimous decision. Lisa paused for just a moment. Then she delivered the response. No. Just that one word. No. Simple and absolute and final. The word hung in the air like a challenge. She continued speaking. Humanity did not survive ice ages by surrendering to the cold. They did not overcome plagues by accepting death. They did not end world wars by submitting to tyrants. They did not split the atom or leave their planet or terraform Mars by accepting limitations that others tried to place on them. The Council had made a mistake. They had mistaken youth for weakness. They had confused inexperience with vulnerability. Lisa's voice grew harder. Earth was now issuing its own ultimatum. The Council had 30 days to withdraw every vessel from the solar system. Any ship that remained after the deadline would be considered hostile. Any hostile vessel would be destroyed. This was not a negotiation. This was not a bluff. This was the only warning they would receive. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Lisa allowed herself a small smile. She had just told the most powerful organization in the galaxy to leave or face the consequences. It felt good. Aboard the Council flagship, Supreme Commander Vexithor watched the broadcast with a feeling he had not experienced in his long military career. Dread. Pure, cold dread. He had studied the humans more carefully than anyone else on the Council. He had watched their entertainment. He had read their history. He had analyzed their military doctrine. What he found had kept him awake during his rest cycles. Around him, the holographic representatives of 47 species flickered with various emotions. Most were outraged. A few seemed confused. None of them seemed afraid, and that worried Vexthor more than anything. Ambassador Quintar of the Serpentine Collective was the first to speak. His species had evolved from ambush predators, and he had never learned patience. He called the human response impossible. He pointed out that Earth had barely left its own planet. Their fastest vessels took months to cross their own solar system. They had no faster-than-light capability. They had no energy shields. This had to be madness or desperation. Council Speaker Zephyros agreed. His crystalline form pulsed with irritation. He had delivered the ultimatum personally, and he took the rejection as a personal insult. He proposed increasing the fleet from 200 vessels to 300. They would demonstrate overwhelming superiority. They would show the humans that resistance was futile. The humans would capitulate once they understood the reality of their situation. Vexthor listened to all of this and felt his dread deepen. He asked for permission to speak. When it was granted, he carefully explained his concerns. The humans did not think like the Council species. They did not calculate acceptable losses the way civilized species did. They did not surrender when defeat was the logical outcome. He had studied their wars and found something terrifying. Humans had a concept they called total war. When pushed to their limits, they would sacrifice everything to destroy their enemies. He gave examples. Humans had once fought a war that killed nearly 100 million of their own species. They had developed weapons that could render their own planet uninhabitable. They had used those weapons knowing the consequences. They had burned their own cities rather than let enemies take them. They had a saying in one of their ancient languages, "Si vis pacem para bellum," if you want peace, prepare for war. Humans had been preparing for war since before they discovered fire. Vexthor recommended immediate withdrawal. He suggested opening diplomatic channels. He proposed treating Earth as an equal rather than a subordinate. The Council had made first contact in the worst possible way. They could still correct this mistake. The Council chamber erupted in angry responses. Species that had never known defeat could not imagine backing down to primitives. Species that had conquered dozens of worlds thought Vexthor was being cowardly. The vote was called, and it was not even close. The fleet would advance. 300 warships would move into Earth's orbital space. The humans would surrender, or they would be crushed. Vexthor returned to his quarters and began writing detailed reports about everything he knew concerning human military capabilities. If the Council would not listen, then at least he could document his warnings. Future historians would know that someone had tried to prevent this disaster. On Earth, preparations were moving faster than anyone thought possible. Every nation contributed whatever they could. Countries that had been enemies for generations now worked side by side. Resources flowed freely between continents. Scientists shared research without worrying about patents or profit. The military coordinated on a scale that had never been seen before. Admiral Morrison stood in Space Command watching the activity on dozens of screens. Shipyards that normally operated with careful precision were now running around the clock. Weapons that had been in testing phases were being rushed into production. Defense platforms that had been planned for construction over the next decade were being assembled in weeks. General Cole joined him, and together they reviewed the defense plans. The moon held humanity's biggest secret. For 40 years, construction crews had been working on the lunar far side. They had hollowed out massive sections of rock. They had built electromagnetic accelerators that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The project had been disguised as mining operations. The Council had been watching, but they had not understood what they were seeing. Earth also had weapons platforms hidden throughout the asteroid belt. Satellites that appeared to be simple communications relays were actually weapons systems. Space stations had hidden missile batteries. Even civilian vessels had been designed with emergency military conversion in mind. The entire solar system had been turned into a defensive fortress, and the Council had no idea. Director Carter brought intelligence updates. The Council fleet was gathering strength. More ships were arriving each day. Energy signatures suggested they were charging weapons and preparing shields. They clearly intended to make an overwhelming show of force. They thought shock and awe would break human resistance. President Hayes called a final meeting before the deadline. Every major world leader attended either in person or via secure communication. They reviewed the plan one last time. Everyone understood the risks. Casualties would be enormous. Some cities might be destroyed. Some orbital stations would certainly be lost. But the alternative was surrender, and that was not acceptable. The president asked each leader directly. Would they commit their forces? Would they accept the cost? One by one they agreed. Russia committed its entire space fleet. China activated its hidden orbital weapons. India prepared its defense lasers. The European Union mobilized every vessel. Even small nations contributed whatever they could. Humanity was united for the first time in its entire history. The deadline approached. The Council fleet moved into position. 300 warships formed a perfect sphere around Earth. They had overwhelming numbers and superior technology. They had fought 17 major campaigns across the galaxy. They had never lost. Morrison watched them come. He had fought in every major conflict of the past 30 years. He had seen humanity at its worst and its best. He knew what humans were capable of when their survival was threatened. The Council was about to learn the same lesson. Lisa Bennett was back on the Valiant, now commanding her own ship. Her crew was ready. Weapons Officer Amy Rodriguez had checked her systems 3 times. Navigation Officer Chris Palmer had confirmed firing solutions. Engineer Kevin Price reported all systems at full power. They had trained for this their entire careers. The final countdown began. 10 minutes until the deadline. The Council ships held their position, expecting surrender. 5 minutes. Still nothing from Earth. 1 minute. The Council began charging weapons, thinking they would need to fire warning shots. Then the deadline passed and everything changed. Morrison gave the order that would echo through history: execute Operation Thunderstrike. Earth's response had arrived, and it was not what anyone expected. The Council fleet's sensors went haywire all at once. What had appeared to be empty space suddenly filled with thousands of new contacts. Every screen on every ship lit up with warnings. Tactical officers shouted reports. Commanders demanded explanations. Nobody understood what was happening. Throughout the solar system, humanity's trap sprang shut. Asteroids that had appeared to be simple rocks suddenly split open, revealing weapons platforms. Satellites that had seemed inert for decades deployed railguns. Space stations that looked like civilian research facilities revealed hidden missile batteries. The entire solar system had been weaponized, and the Council had never noticed. But the real shock came from the moon. The lunar far side had always faced away from Earth and away from the Council's observation posts. Now it split open like a cracked egg. 16 massive electromagnetic accelerators stretched across the surface. Each one was hundreds of kilometers long. Each one had been disguised as mining equipment or research facilities. Each one now began firing. The projectiles were simple tungsten rods. No explosives. No guidance systems. No advanced alien technology. Just dense metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. Physics did the rest. When something that heavy moved that fast, it carried more energy than a nuclear weapon. And the moon had thousands of them ready to fire. The first volley hit 12 Council ships before anyone realized they were under attack. The ships simply ceased to exist. One moment they were there. The next moment there was only expanding clouds of debris. Their shields had been designed to stop energy weapons and explosive missiles. They were useless against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Captain Ryan Murphy sat in the command chair of the Valiant and watched the tactical display with satisfaction. His crew worked with perfect efficiency. Weapons Officer Amy Rodriguez called out firing solutions. Navigation Officer Chris Palmer adjusted their position. Engineer Kevin Price kept the engines running at maximum capacity. They had trained for this moment, and now it was real. Murphy gave the order for continuous fire. Every railgun on every human ship opened up. The electromagnetic accelerators on the moon fired again and again. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from hidden platforms throughout the asteroid belt. The barrage was relentless and devastating. On the Council flagship, chaos reigned. Admiral Vexthor watched his fleet disintegrate on the tactical displays. Ships that had survived decades of combat were torn apart in seconds. Experienced crews died without understanding what killed them. The humans were not just fighting back. They were winning. Ambassador Quintar shrieked his confusion. This should not be possible. The humans had inferior technology. They had smaller numbers. They should not have this kind of firepower. How are they doing this? Vexthor answered with a voice that sounded hollow and defeated. The humans had weaponized everything. They had turned their entire solar system into a trap. They did not need advanced technology, when simple physics worked just as well. They had spent decades preparing for this exact scenario. The Council had been so focused on their own technological superiority that they never considered human ingenuity. A proximity alarm screamed across the bridge. New contacts were emerging from Earth's atmosphere. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Small, fast contacts that moved with impossible agility. Someone suggested they might be escape pods. Maybe the humans were evacuating their planet. Vexthor knew better. Those were not escape pods. Those were fighters. The humans had developed combat spacecraft that could operate both in atmosphere and in space. Each one was small enough to avoid most targeting systems, but large enough to carry serious weapons. And they were swarming the Council fleet like angry insects. Lieutenant Kate Foster pulled her fighter into a tight spiral. G-forces pressed against her body, but her training held. Her neural interface fed targeting data directly into her brain. She did not think about firing. She just did. Her plasma cannons tore through an alien cruiser's engines. The ship listed to one side, bleeding atmosphere and debris. Her squadron formed up around her, 12 fighters moving as one unit. They had trained together for 5 years. They knew each other's moves without needing to communicate. They saw a Council destroyer ahead and accelerated toward it. Scorpion Squadron hit the destroyer from 6 different angles. The alien ship tried to track them, but they were too small and too fast. Its point defense systems were designed for missiles and torpedoes. They could not handle targets that could think and react. The fighters launched smart missiles that used artificial intelligence to find weaknesses in the shields. They exploited gaps in the armor. They targeted critical systems with surgical precision. The destroyer died hard, but it died. Kate pulled away from the explosion and immediately searched for her next target. There were plenty to choose from. The Council fleet was massive, but it was also confused. Ships collided with each other, trying to evade the kinetic bombardment. Commanders gave contradictory orders. The carefully organized formation dissolved into chaos. All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human forces were vastly outnumbered, but they fought with desperate fury. They knew their home was at stake. They knew their families were watching from below. They knew that losing meant extinction. So they did not lose. The humans did not fight fair, and they did not apologize for it. They used the sun's gravity well to slingshot missiles at incredible speeds. They detonated nuclear weapons at range using the electromagnetic pulse to disable enemy sensors. They rammed damaged ships into healthy ones, sacrificing hulls to take down superior foes. Every tactic was unconventional. Every strategy was designed not for glory, but for maximum enemy casualties. Commander Sophie Grant watched from the bridge of the Defiant as a Council battleship tried to retreat. Her ship was damaged and listing, but her weapons still worked. She ordered her crew to pursue. Her chief engineer protested that their engines were failing. Grant told him they only needed to work for 5 more minutes. The Defiant caught the battleship and unloaded every remaining missile. The alien ship's shields flickered and failed. Its armor cracked. Its reactor went critical. The explosion lit up the space around Earth like a second sun. Grant's ship barely escaped the blast radius. Her engineer reported that engines were now completely offline. Life support was at 50%. Hull breaches on 3 decks, but they had survived and the enemy had not. That was all that mattered. Lieutenant Jack Stevens piloted his fighter through a debris field that had once been 6 Council ships. His wingman, Lieutenant Sarah Green, stayed close behind him. Their squadron's mission was to identify command ships and eliminate them. The Council's military operated on strict hierarchy. Disrupting their chain of command created massive confusion. Jack spotted what looked like a flagship. It was larger than the other vessels and heavily protected. Multiple smaller ships surrounded it in a defensive formation. He called out the target to his squadron. 12 fighters acknowledged and adjusted their approach. They hit the defensive screen hard and fast. 3 fighters were lost in the first pass, but the rest broke through. Jack launched everything he had at the flagship. Missiles and torpedoes and plasma bolts. His wingman did the same. The entire squadron focused their fire on one massive target. The flagship's shields held it first. Then they flickered. Then they failed. The armor underneath was thick but not thick enough. The missiles found weak points. The plasma cannons burned through structural supports. The massive ship began breaking apart. Jack pulled away as the flagship exploded. He had lost friends in that attack. Good people who would never see their families again. But the mission was complete. The Council fleet was now operating without central command. Individual ships began making their own decisions. Some tried to press the attack. Some tried to retreat. Some just drifted in confusion. Morrison watched the battle from Space Command and allowed himself a moment of hope. The plan was working better than expected. Casualties were high but acceptable. The defense grid was holding. The moon's accelerators were still firing. The fighter squadrons were wreaking havoc on enemy formations. Earth might actually survive this, but he knew it was not over. The Council still had superior numbers. They still had faster-than-light capability, which meant they could call for reinforcements. They still had weapons that could devastate the planet from orbit, if they decided that total destruction was preferable to defeat. 6 hours after the battle began, the tide finally turned decisively. The Council fleet broke. Ships that had been pressing attack suddenly reversed course. Formations that had been tight dissolved. The retreat was not organized. It was panic. Vessels fled in every direction using faster-than-light drives to escape the solar system. Of the 300 ships that had entered Earth's space, only 73 escaped. The rest were destroyed or so badly damaged they could not move. Some surrendered and were taken as prizes. Some self-destructed rather than face capture. The debris would orbit Earth for years as a reminder of what happened when someone threatened humanity. The cost had been high. 42 human ships destroyed, 3 orbital stations gone, 8,000 military personnel dead. The Council's response to their humiliating defeat was predictable and terrifying. They would send a bigger fleet. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within days. Some species celebrated humanity's victory. Others feared what it meant. But the Council could not allow such defiance to stand. They called upon every member species to contribute ships. They demanded resources. They mobilized a war machine that had conquered dozens of worlds. 2 months after the first battle, 5,000 warships assembled at a rally point beyond the Kuiper Belt. This was not a show of force. This was an extermination fleet. The Council had decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist. Earth would be crushed. Its people would be scattered. Its solar system would be occupied. There would be no negotiation this time. No warnings. No second chances. President Hayes stood in the White House Situation Room watching the enemy fleet gather on long-range sensors. The numbers were staggering. 5,000 ships against maybe 300 human vessels that were still combat-capable. Even with Earth's defensive advantages, this would be difficult. Around him, the military leadership and scientific advisors reviewed their increasingly desperate options. General Cole pulled up tactical projections. Every simulation showed the same result. Earth could hurt the enemy badly, but eventually the sheer numbers would overwhelm them. The moon's accelerators had limited ammunition. The orbital platforms could be destroyed. The fighter squadrons would run out of pilots. Unless something changed, humanity would lose this fight. Dr. Nathan Cross spoke up from his position at the end of the table. He was head of the Advanced Weapons Division, and he had been working on projects that made most people nervous. He explained that Earth had been holding back its most dangerous capabilities. The first battle had been fought with conventional weapons, kinetic kill vehicles and missiles and plasma cannons, but humanity had developed things that went far beyond conventional. Cross activated a holographic display showing a device that looked deceptively simple. He called it the Casimir bomb. It exploited quantum vacuum fluctuations to create localized space-time disruptions. Within its effective radius, the laws of physics stopped working properly. Matter behaved strangely. Energy flowed in impossible directions. Ships caught in the effect would find their systems failing in unpredictable ways. President Hayes asked how big the radius was. Cross answered approximately 1 astronomical unit, the distance from Earth to the Sun. And they had 17 of these devices positioned throughout the solar system. Each one had taken 10 years to build. Each one cost more than a space station. Each one was ready to deploy. The silence in the room lasted several seconds. Someone whispered that it was insane. Cross smiled grimly and agreed. He explained that insane weapons were exactly what desperate times required. Humanity faced extinction. Normal rules no longer applied. They would use every tool available no matter how dangerous. The Council fleet advanced with confidence born from overwhelming numbers. They had learned from their first defeat. Their formation was spread wide to minimize casualties from kinetic weapons. They deployed advanced sensors to detect hidden platforms. They prepared countermeasures for every tactic the humans had used before. They were ready for conventional warfare. They were not ready for what humanity unleashed. Commander Sophie Grant sat on the bridge of the newly repaired Defiant and watched the enemy fleet cross the designated threshold. Her orders were simple. When the lead ships reached the marker, she would activate the Casimir devices. She hoped the scientists knew what they were doing. She gave the order, and throughout the solar system, 17 impossible weapons activated simultaneously. Reality itself seemed to shudder. Space-time bent in ways that violated every known law of physics. The effects spread outward at the speed of light, creating spheres of chaos. Council ships caught in the affected zones found their engines suddenly producing thrust in random directions. Some ships accelerated forward, others backward. Some spun wildly. Weapon systems fired at their own vessels. Life support equipment began creating toxic gases instead of oxygen. Navigation computers reported positions that made no sense. Several ships simply folded in on themselves as localized gravity went wrong. The confusion was total. Thousands of highly trained crew members suddenly found themselves fighting their own equipment. Captains gave orders, but their ships refused to respond. Engineers tried to fix problems, but every solution made things worse. The carefully coordinated fleet dissolved into chaos. But the Council fleet was massive and most vessels were outside the affected areas. Commanders who had not been caught adjusted their approach. They spread even wider. They slowed their advance. They probed carefully for more traps. They still had overwhelming numbers. They could still win this. Grant watched them adapt and gave her second order. Phase 2 was ready. Hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt activated new weapons that humanity had only tested once. Gravity manipulation devices. Humanity had learned to bend space-time deliberately. They could create focused beams that crushed ships like tin cans or flung them away at deadly velocities. The beams were invisible until they hit. Then Council ships simply crumpled or shot off in random directions. Hulls designed to withstand meteor impacts collapsed under artificial gravity. Crews experienced forces that turned them into paste. The weapons were horrifying and brutally effective. Lieutenant Jack Stevens piloted his fighter through the chaos of the battlefield. His squadron had a new mission now. The Council fleet was in disarray, but it was still dangerous. Human fighters needed to exploit the confusion. Find the command ships, kill them, make the enemy even more disorganized. He spotted a large vessel that looked like a command carrier. It was surrounded by protective escorts, but those ships were struggling with the gravity weapons. Jack called out the target to his wingman, Sarah Green. Their squadron acknowledged and moved to attack positions. They came in fast from multiple directions. The escorts tried to respond, but half their systems were malfunctioning. Point defense weapons fired wildly, missing the agile fighters. Jack launched his payload and pulled away hard. Behind him, missiles found their target. The command carrier's shields failed. Its armor cracked. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull. Sarah's fighter took a hit from a lucky shot. Her ship spun out of control, leaking atmosphere. Jack watched helplessly as she tried to stabilize. For a moment, it looked like she might make it. Then her reactor went critical, and the explosion consumed her fighter. Jack felt rage replace grief. He turned back toward the enemy and fired everything he had. All across the battlefield, human forces pushed their advantage. Every weapon was used beyond its design limits. Every pilot flew harder than they had trained. Every crew member understood that losing meant extinction. The Council had come to destroy Earth completely. There would be no surrender. No occupation. Just death. The battle raged for 3 days without pause. Ships fought until their ammunition was gone, then rammed enemy vessels. Pilots flew until they could barely see, then flew longer. Crews worked until they collapsed, then dragged themselves back to their stations. This was total war. This was survival. This was humanity showing the galaxy what desperation looked like. Morrison coordinated the defense from Space Command, barely sleeping or eating. Reports flooded in constantly. Mars Orbital Station 1 was gone, taking 20,000 people with it. The defense grid around Venus had collapsed. The asteroid belt platforms were running out of ammunition. But the enemy was suffering worse. Every hour brought reports of more Council ships destroyed or disabled. On the fourth day, something changed. The Council fleet began pulling back, not retreating exactly, but consolidating their remaining forces. They had lost more than 4,000 ships. The survivors were battered and low on supplies. Their chain of command was shattered. Individual captains were making their own decisions, and most of them decided that dying for the Council was not worth it. President Hayes addressed the nation and the world. His face showed exhaustion, but his voice was steady. Earth had won again. Against even more impossible odds, humanity had survived. The cost was terrible. 30% of their military spacecraft were destroyed. 3 major orbital facilities were gone. Casualties numbered in the tens of thousands. Cities on Earth had been hit by debris, but they had won. Then Hayes addressed the galaxy. His message was broadcast on every frequency. He spoke directly to the Galactic Council and any species that might be considering continuing this war. Humanity had not wanted this fight. They had asked only to be left alone, to grow and develop at their own pace. The Council had forced this war upon them. He explained that humanity survived because they never learned to quit. They thrived because they turned every obstacle into opportunity. The Council had given them a common enemy. There was nothing more dangerous than unified humanity with a clear purpose. The galaxy had now seen what humans could do when threatened. They had seen Earth's weapons. They had witnessed human determination. Hayes delivered his final warning. Leave humanity alone, let Earth develop in peace, or learn what total war truly meant, because what the Council had experienced so far was just the beginning. 6 months after the second battle, the galaxy looked completely different. The Council's authority had shattered like glass. Their fleet was destroyed. Their credibility was gone. Member species that had obeyed for centuries now questioned everything. Some withdrew from the collective entirely. Others demanded reforms. The Kalthari supremacy, which had led the war effort, faced rebellions on a dozen worlds. The carefully maintained order of the galaxy was collapsing. Admiral Vexthor found himself stripped of rank but not of influence. He had warned the Council repeatedly about underestimating humanity. His warnings had been ignored. Now those same Council members who had dismissed him were asking for his advice. He told them all the same thing. The war was lost. Make peace before humanity decided to come looking for revenge. Vexthor requested permission to travel to Earth personally. He wanted to meet the humans face to face. He wanted to understand how they had achieved the impossible. The request was granted because nobody else wanted the job. Nobody else wanted to face the species that had humiliated the entire galaxy. His ship approached Earth, broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency. Human defense networks tracked him carefully but held their fire. He was cleared to land in Geneva, where the Department of Interstellar Relations had been established. The building sat where the United Nations had once stood. Now it housed humanity's first real diplomatic corps for dealing with aliens. Vexthor materialized in a conference room designed to accommodate different species. Waiting for him were 3 humans. Secretary Daniel Foster led Earth's diplomatic efforts. Colonel Linda Martinez advised on military matters. Admiral Jake Morrison had orchestrated much of the defense strategy. All 3 looked tired, but their eyes were sharp. Morrison gestured to a seat built for Vexthor's physiology. The Admiral thanked him and settled into the chair. He began by acknowledging his failures. He had tried to warn the Council. They had not listened. Thousands had died because of that arrogance. He owed humanity an apology, even though words could not undo the damage. Foster leaned forward and surprised Vexthor by thanking him. Intelligence reports showed that Vexthor had deliberately slowed his fleet's advance during the second battle. Evacuation shuttles from threatened stations had been given time to escape. Civilian vessels had been allowed to flee without pursuit. Those actions saved 17,000 lives. Vexthor's form shifted in surprise. Humans tracked such things. Individual deaths in the middle of total war. He asked if they really kept records of every life saved and every life lost. Martinez nodded and explained that humans remembered everything, the good and the bad. That was why they were so dangerous. But it was also why they could be trusted. They honored their debts. Morrison explained why Vexthor had been invited. The galaxy needed a new order. The council system based on domination had failed. Humanity was proposing something different. A voluntary alliance called the Federation of Free Worlds. Membership would be by choice, not force. Defense would be mutual. Technology and resources would be shared based on need and capability. Most importantly, no species would surrender their sovereignty or culture. Vexthor considered this carefully. He asked why anyone would join such an organization after humanity had devastated 2 council fleets. Why would species trust humans who had proven so deadly? Foster smiled and explained that species would join because of that. Earth had proven that independence was possible. Smaller powers did not have to submit to larger ones. They had also proven capable of defending allies. 17 species had already expressed interest in preliminary talks. The former admiral asked what humanity gained from this arrangement. Morrison's expression turned serious. Peace eventually. Time to develop without threats. Allies when the next danger emerged because there was always another threat. Humans prepared for possibilities but hoped for peace. They were not pacifists, but they were not warmongers either. They were survivors who understood cooperation was stronger than conquest. Over the following months, the Federation took shape. Earth became its unofficial capital not by demand but by consensus. Humanity's military provided security for smaller species who could not defend themselves. Human diplomats who had spent centuries navigating complex alliances on their own world now helped broker agreements between species that had been enemies for generations. Captain Kate. Foster commanded a squadron aboard the carrier Unity. Her pilots came from 6 different species now. Humans flew alongside aliens who had been shooting at them months before. She sat in her briefing room watching her crew interact and marveling at how quickly things had changed. Her second in command was a 4-armed Quiloxian named Trevivor. He had fought for the Council during both battles. Now he flew as her wingman. He commented that it was strange how quickly enemies became allies. 6 months ago, his people had considered humans dangerous primitives. Now they flew together. Kate asked what changed his mind. Trevivor made a gesture that his species used for respect. He explained that his people had realized something important. Dangerous primitives made excellent allies. Humans fought like cornered predators, but they also protected fiercely. They were loyal to companions. These were qualities the galaxy had forgotten. The Council had bred caution and obedience. Humanity brought back something wild and necessary. On Earth, President Hayes met with ambassadors from 43 species. The Federation was growing faster than projections had suggested. The galaxy had been waiting for an alternative to the Council's rule. They just needed someone brave enough or crazy enough to challenge the system. Humanity had done both. Hayes told his cabinet that they were writing a new chapter in galactic history, not through conquest or subjugation, but through mutual defense and shared values. There would be challenges, cultural misunderstandings, conflicts over resources, species that thought differently and wanted different things. But that was what humans did best. They took impossible situations and found solutions. Morrison added that they had taken the chaos of first contact and created order. They had taken enemies and made them allies. The Council had ordered Earth's surrender and humanity had laughed. Now the Council was the one adapting to new reality, a reality where humanity had earned their seat at the table through blood and determination. General Cole reviewed military preparations. The Federation needed a unified defense force. Training programs were being established. Joint exercises were scheduled. Human officers were teaching alien crews about unconventional tactics. Alien engineers were sharing their technology with human scientists. The exchange of knowledge was creating something stronger than either side had been alone. Dr. Cross presented new research developments. Working with alien scientists had opened possibilities humanity had never considered. Combining human innovation with alien knowledge was producing breakthroughs, faster than light travel that humans could actually use, energy shields that worked with Earth's technology, medical advances that could save lives across dozens of species. Director Carter reported on intelligence gathering. Not all species were happy about the Federation. Some Council loyalists saw it as a threat. A few radical groups were planning attacks. There were rumors of species developing weapons specifically designed to counter human tactics. The Federation needed to stay vigilant, but the overall trend was positive. More species applied for membership each week. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. For the first time in galactic history, different species were choosing to work together as equals, rather than being forced into hierarchy. Years later, historians would call this the Terran Age, the period when humanity emerged as a galactic power not through subjugation, but through their refusal to submit. The battles would be remembered as the Sovereignty Wars. Future generations would study them as examples of why the right to self-determination was worth any cost. Kate Foster sat in her fighter years after the war ended. She was training a new pilot now. A young human named Bobby Clark who reminded her of herself at that age. Eager and confident and maybe a little too brave. She taught him the same lessons she had learned. Fly smart. Trust your wingman. Remember that every enemy ship has people inside who think they are fighting for something important. Bobby asked her what it was like during the war. Kate thought about Sarah Green who had died beside her. About the thousands of others who never came home. About the terror and exhaustion and desperate hope that somehow they would survive. She told Bobby it was the worst experience of her life. Then she told him it was also when humanity proved what they were capable of. The Council had made a fatal mistake. They had seen human youth and inexperience. They had assumed those things meant weakness. They had forgotten that young species were also hungry species. Humanity had wanted to reach the stars. They had wanted to explore and grow and find their place in the universe. The Council tried to deny them that future, so humanity had fought. They had bled. They had sacrificed. They had shown the galaxy that Earth would not surrender, not to threats, not to superior numbers, not to anyone. And in doing so, they had changed everything. Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new Federation headquarters orbiting Earth.